Saugatuck City Council Workshop for December 18th, 2024. Jamie, will you call the roll?
Anderson,
Here.
Clark,
Here.
Dean, Gardner, Muncy,
Here.
Peterson.
Here.
Stanton.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. Scott asked for an excused absence. He has a personal commitment tonight, so can I get a motion?
So
for that?
moved.
Second? All, with voice vote, all in favor?
Yes. Yeah.
Any opposed? And I have not heard from Russ, so. Any agenda?
Probably just late.
Pardon?
I bet he's just running
Yeah, I
late.
bet. Any agenda changes?
Nope.
Okay, so that brings us to public comment on agenda items only. There's nobody in the room. Steve, do you have a public comment?
I don't see it.
All right.
No, Holly, I'm sorry, I'm not yet on the, I was just going to kind of listen in case anything came up regarding the waterfront issues, but I think this planning commission, looked at it for several months, made the revisions, had a public hearing, and it's now being sent over to you guys for your review and potential passage.
All right. Well, I think that's the end of public comment. That will take us to the discussion item A on the waterfront. So Luke, teeing that up, Brian, you teeing that?
Yes, yep, Luke's gonna tee that up for you. If I can talk today, I
And
gotta.
that's on page 3. And welcome, Russ.
Hello, Brian White.
Hello. I'm sure you guys have seen my memo, so I'll just give a quick overview of that. During a planning commission meeting, we received concerns raised about the first floor apartments in the Waterfront Preservation District and their potential impact on public access to the boardwalk. While upper floor apartments have been and will continue to be allowed, first floor waterfront facing apartments were recently permitted, and the commission has recommended amendments to remove first floor apartments as permitted and special uses. The review also recognized the section on PUD departures, also reorganized the section on PUD departures for clarity and consistency without adding any new allowances. The commission specifically restricted height modification requests and ensured public access through PUDs is preserved by legal mechanisms. The intent of the recommendation is to really do 4 things, and that is to remove first floor apartments as permitted or special use in the downtown waterfront preservation district. 2 is to include restrictions on PUD height requests. 3 is to rewrite and reorganize the authorized downtown waterfront preservation district PUD departures. The intent and requirements will remain the same, but the language is improved and clarified. And 4 is to include a required mechanism or legal instrument that memorializes public access provided through the PUD process. So I'm here to answer any questions about that. And Jake is here to answer any questions that I can't answer.
Great. Questions? Chris?
Mayor, thank you. I have a question on page 6, and I'm trying to remember the discussion, but it's under authorized downtown waterfront preservation district departures.
Yep.
And it says then there will be the reduction or elimination of 1 or more minimum side setback requirements. Wouldn't that cut into the view shed then? I mean, then it can be wider than. And then same thing with number 2, reduction of the minimum waterfront setback down to 215, which, and the third one, which also down to 15, which all 3 of them seem to me to allow larger lot coverage by a PUD. Is that, am I reading it wrong?
No, that's an authorized departure in, they would have to provide the public access that, the planning commission is trying to memorialize here. So that would be, that is a departure that they're proposing would be approvable by the planning commission.
I just have a concern of limiting the view shed or reducing the lot size and making the PUD larger. and I know you've been talking about you have to have a quid pro quo or something like that, but we set the standards. We don't have to negotiate.
Right,
You know,
yeah.
we don't have to negotiate. Yeah, if you cut this down, we'll give this for you. If we want their PUD, if they want a PUD, then they have to allow public access, period. I don't know why we're negotiating down. That's just-
I will say that my recollection of the waterfront development amendment as a whole is that it has some guiding principles for the planning commission in granting these departures from these minimum standards. I believe there is an intent to still preserve access to and the view of the waterfront. But and I mean, forgive me, I wasn't at all of these meetings. Trent was covering some of this stuff, but I do believe that the quid pro quo being referenced is essentially exchanging some flexibility with respect to those setbacks in exchange for maintaining the public boardwalk. And I believe part of that is born from the fact that, you know, that is technically not city property. And so to entirely, you know, basically say that you can't use this part of your property for anything, that could place the city in a questionable position if someone wanted to challenge it.
And again, I would question that. I mean, we're the decision makers. If we say, if you want a PUD, this is what you have to do, then I don't see why we have to reduce our setbacks and fill the lot up. So I would not be in support of that.
Well, I think if I can, Steve has his hand up. I'll let him go first.
I don't know if it's appropriate because I technically part of the public, but hey, Chris, the reason that this was put in is because if they just meet all the standards, which we set in the waterfront preservation district, they can build. They don't have to do a PUD. They can just build. What we said is that if they want something other than what's set in the standards, they would have to give us this public access. And then we would at least look at these three places that they could possibly have some slight variance. But they don't have to have a PUD. So trust me that if they want to build and not change, you know, do all the side setbacks, do all the things that are listed in the waterfront preservation, they can do it. But the PUD gives them the ability to potentially ask for these three variances in exchange for public access. So when you say the PUD, we can regulate it, we can't. We've already regulated through zoning what the setbacks are. Excuse me. So
Okay,
this is
then-
just to give us the possibility that if they wanted to do something outside of what's provided as a permitted use, that we could then try to gain the public access. Otherwise, the public access is at risk.
So then right now, if this is a PUD, then we still have the single family residence. So if someone purchased one of those to put in a single family residence, they could close it off too, and we'd have no recourse.
No, because a single family resident is currently not a permitted use. And one of the things that we tried to do, and
Well, I
Jake
thought it
probably-
was. I thought,
No, and one of the things that Jake was kind of promoting or had explained to us in our last planning commission meeting is that trying to limit the use of how we would stipulate a use is something that would go beyond what we would actually use as a, you know, if you want to call it quick pro quo or as a negotiating tool. We can use setbacks and lot coverage, you know, as ways that we can use as a negotiation, but that's where we could, you know, we didn't put in like the whole first floor. We just took first floor out of it, you know, so that there can't be first floor residential in the district, whether it's a permitted use or if you went through the PUD.
on the water and on the street both?
Correct.
To clarify, I think that they can still apply, for first floor apartments through PUD. It's,
No.
I thought this was
I think they
the,
can.
No,
that's what's
in our
being
last
done.
version, that was now taken out, and it was not an option that they would be able to ask for a variance through zoning on.
Oh,
So
okay.
in Luke's defense, I will say that there is a little bit of room for more clarity in the proposed amendment to note that first floor dwellings are not permitted through the PUD process. I understand that they were listed as uses in the prior iteration of the ordinance. But the ordinance also says that, through the planned unit development process, you can have departures from dimensional standards. I think arguably what floors something on is at least the argument could be made that that's dimensional. So what I think one thing that I would recommend in looking at this ordinance, if the council's intent is to totally prohibit first floor dwellings, would be just to clarify that in authorizing departures from these dimensional standards, that the through the PUD process, that the planning commission cannot authorize first floor dwellings.
Okay, Madam Mayor, I have a second question on section 1. This is, if I look at that, it said the zoning ordinance amended to be changed from C, first floor and upper floor apartments, except for first floor waters shall not face Water Street, to upper floor apartments. And if we're making them non-residential, where does it say in here that it's going to be both on the water and the street, that it eliminates first floor residential?
Well, under the previous iteration, it was, there was a specific allowance for first floor apartments. Now the only thing that's specifically allowed for is upper floor apartments. So
Okay,
if you're on the
either
first
side,
floor, it wouldn't
period.
matter what
Okay.
way you're facing. Yep.
Okay.
Anything else?
So my question would be, like, we've had discussions with, folks that want to do a planned unit development on, Water Street, North Water Street. And there's already, first floor dwellings in that area. Is there any difference between North Water Street and South? And like, when we were talking about it, we were gaining some access. We were gaining like 3 points of public access, and like the whole waterfront had public access. And it was more like a negotiation, like, hey, we would allow one, unit on the first floor if you give us this, this, and this. So does this mean that going forward, we have that negotiation is gone?
Well, I wasn't here for that side of things. Yeah, my understanding is that we're just looking to remove the first floor apartments from special and approved uses. So yes, I guess so. Yeah.
There's a little bit of, yeah, and I understand, your point, Councilmember Stanton, because there was a previous, even, I think it was through a PUD process where there was some first floor residential allowed on the northern part of North Street. I think some of the discussions that we had with legal counsel and whether or not to still allow first floor apartments through the PUD process, and that's assuming the council was, agreeable to that. There were some concerns about, as Mr. Whitty indicated, the dimensional nature of where that's located, and then the nexus to then, regulating or requiring that there be some sort of, access still permitted. You want to kind of touch on that, Jake, and why it was kind of a Nolan and Dolan kind of evaluation on that?
Well, I could shed, a little bit of light there. Ryan is referencing that when we are attaching conditions to individuals' use of their property, there has to be some kind of, connection with the use in question and these legitimate public purposes, and what is going to be, the potential adverse impacts that their use is going to cause. And I mean, I think we probably have an opinion on it somewhere if the council wants to look at that and see it in greater detail. But at the end of the day, from the standpoint of making these regulations more defensible, and that would be specifically against a takings lawsuit that would allege, that the city is depriving someone of all beneficial use of their property and essentially requiring it to be held open for use by the public. Our conclusion was that tying in the public access with the PUD standards that allow a greater use of the property than would otherwise be permitted under the standard provisions of the zoning ordinance would be the most defensible.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, thank you. Steve, thank you to the Planning Commission for all the work on this, having been involved in this myself. The devil's in the details on this. And I appreciate the questions that are being asked by Councilmember Peterson today too, and Councilmember Stanton. So from my perspective, what's important in my mind to remember, or at least to consider as we do this, is that if you look from Water Street South all the way up to Water Street North up to the government dock and Mosquito Park, there are private, public properties along that entire boardwalk. And frankly, the only unimpeded sidewalk or walkway for the public is from Coughlin Park up to the chain ferry.
Correct.
You can walk all of that. It's a mix of public and private. And it's always been in Saugatuck, at least in my memory, my experience, is that there's always been an understanding of people, property owners, and developers that access to that boardwalk is critically important to our economy. It's critically important to our community. It's a sense of localness here in this community. To be able to do this is very unique. So the extent that the zoning ordinance can protect that, I support it. Of course, why this is important today is because you've got some properties that are potentially developable, particularly the Singapore Yacht Club parking lot. That could very well be on the market at some point. Could have Coral Gables. I'm not saying any of these are, but there's properties that are maybe going to be in scope here. And I would want this to continue to support this long-standing, whatever principle, whatever you want to call it, tradition, custom, is that access to the waterfront is not impeded by development. And I think on the face of this appears to support that. Where it kind of gets a little confusing for me is when you start to get north of the ferry and you get in, because at that point, none of that property is, you cannot access the waterfront, the public, except for like the barge. Back when the operation, when Great Lakes Outfitters was operating and so forth, you could walk to the waterfront if you were a customer, but they weren't generally open to the public. And the Spear Street boat launch, but north of that, Star of Saugatuck, all the way up to Retro Boats, that's all private property. So in the extent that in the future, those properties were to change hands or to be redeveloped, I would want that to be then that continuance of what we experienced today. So what I'm saying is that, some of this has to be thought through in terms of what the long-term goal is here, right? It's to keep what we have, but also in potentially increase that as the opportunity arises, but not impede developers either. However, I do think I think it's fair to say that I would be in support of this ordinance if it, I think it's perfectly acceptable to exclude development of apartments and single-family homes at the street level, especially on the water side, because that will create some issues for that continuance of this. And I'm speaking very high level here, but that's really where I think this really needs to go. And what we heard from the public at length during that summer of 2022, when we went out to Oxbow and we did tables here, and people were very clear. I want to be able to view the water and I want to be able to walk on the water. Period.
Yeah, and we kind of touched on it, with Chris's questions, and I think this is what we were, going through this process, what we were trying to do. Like we couldn't, there's issues with simply, through a regular, whether it be permitted or special land use process, saying you must provide public access to your property. There's an issue with doing that, but we can incentivize that through a PUD process and saying, if you're willing to do that, we're willing to allow some departures from some of our zoning standards. And part of that Waterfront Preservation Office did, create greater setbacks and looked at lot coverage. And so we kind of looked at those view sheds through those properties to kind of help with that access, at least from that perspective, and perspective from the streets and the sidewalks, but that like direct public access and walking along a piece of property. That's what this PUD process, really is meant to have, where we have those discussions and try to, get those, those remaining properties, or if there's redevelopment of a property for it to remain open to the public, that hopefully that can happen through that PUD process.
Would we lose any negotiating power as far as public access if we deny people like an option to have a first floor apartment?
I know there's the interest in there has been some interest with developers in wanting to have some first floor apartments, especially with that, 640, 650 property that's come up now between two different developers and trying to make, the development numbers work and that sort of thing. So there's interest in it.
That's just my
Yeah.
fear. That's just my fear, you guys, is just losing that negotiating power to be able to say, give us, hey, if we give you this, and you're willing to give us more public access, are we losing that negotiating power? That's all I'm asking.
Madam Mayor, my understanding is that already does that. We don't have to throw in first floor apartments anyway. Because these are the negotiation points right there. Those 3 things. You can negotiate the minimum side setbacks, the waterfront setback, and lot coverage requirements. So those are the negotiation points right now that we have for PUD. I don't think we want to take the step, again, going down to residential first floor on the water or on the street.
Yeah, I saw Joe had his hand up too, but so
Sorry, Joe.
essentially, go ahead. Essentially, section 2 that's being referenced by Councilmember Peterson in the last sentence being changed to C, upper floor apartments will allow apartments, but not first floor, period. So I would agree with Councilmember Peterson.
And we had, on the planning commission, had some very spirited discussions. I think Council Peterson was involved in line and helping contribute to, really what it comes down to is how much flexibility do you want to provide the PUD process, knowing that whatever you put in there is going to get negotiated away, right? There's not a developer on earth that's not going to look at that and say, well, we want all, right? And to hang out that waterfront. And so we look at it carefully and we said, okay, setbacks, that's a reasonable, right?
Mhm.
That's a reasonable approach, gives us a lot of flexibility. Certainly has the ability to make the property appear to be more valuable, offer more value to the property. We looked at height and said that that's a big concern of the public. We don't want to get that away, right? And then we listened, of course, to legal on first floor residential, and I think majority of the council or planning commission was reluctant to go down that path of first floor residential. In fact, some were a little bit surprised, myself included, that it was already in there. So, after a long debate, that was kind of unanimous recommendation of what we're seeing here. So
Thank you.
that helps.
I do appreciate that. Yeah. Yep.
Was this an oversight when we did all of this? I remember when all of that was passed, a lot of folks in town, including myself, thought that it included kind of what we're saying now.
Okay.
Was this an oversight that you guys went back and, doing this again, or?
No, the only question really what got this going is the discussion on the first floor residential. And, whether or not that was appropriate, whether it should be excluded, and then again, taking the input from legal after they looked at it.
Right.
That was kind of what drove it from my perspective anyway.
Okay. The one house I'm thinking of is what used to be the Bentley, the bed and breakfast, which is now owned by DeVos, I think.
The one
Or someone. And that's a private residence now?
you're talking near Coral Gables,
Yeah.
near the annex.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a private residence.
So that would be
Yeah.
grandfathered, and then if that were to be sold, would that mean that they could not have first floor dwelling?
No, if
It can
it's
stay.
existing, yeah, and
It's grandfathered. but
unless
if
there's
they
some
sold
kind
it-
of change of use. Yeah, if they sold it, what's existing is there. If they, I don't know, applied for a change of use to change it to something else, then obviously we would look at current standards and
Okay.
make it, we try and make sure that it conformed.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, they could,
That's
if,
the only residence I'm thinking of that's on the boardwalk. Is there another one?
So there's first floor apartments right next to Retro. So that's a first floor apartment.
Boardwalk doesn't go that far, right?
Well, if you're talking boardwalk or sidewalk, it's still,
Oh, sidewalk too,
Yeah.
right?
yeah. And then the inn that is
That's right,
in between the barge and Retro.
right.
Bayside, is it Bayside Inn? Yeah. So there's that. And then you're going down to where it used to be Big Lake Outfitters, and that's the property that, has been discussed.
Yeah, thank you. Just also a reminder that this entire district is in the historic district.
I beg your pardon?
This entire district is in the historic district. So any discussions regarding a property demolition, for instance, if a property were to be sold, would have to go through that process as well.
Right,
So there's still influence on that from that perspective.
okay.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor,
Yeah.
just for clarification, that the reason the Bentley became a single-family unit was because they came to the planning commission when I was on it and were able to get that zoning changed to that, for that specific property. We didn't change it going north, I don't think, because there was no boardwalk there. And what the first thing my understanding is they closed the boardwalk and we negotiated it so that they got the street in so they could put their yacht there. That's how it stayed open.
Who maintains the boardwalk? Are they the individual property owners?
Other questions?
Yeah,
Jake, and, oh, go ahead.
Actually, just a little bit of clarification. I think there is some property that's city-owned that Singapore maintains the boardwalk
Right.
as part of the lease.
Yeah.
Right,
So they don't
Okay.
technically own the property, but I believe they maintain it on behalf.
And we have an easement with the Butler too, I believe, for all that property. You talked about the parking lot. I don't think they can, that's,
by Cooks?
yeah, my understanding was the planning commission, when the Butler property sold, that there was negotiation with the boardwalk staying open.
I believe that's true, Chris. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of unique scenarios like that that I've discussed with, Chris Patterson and I think our official city position is that we're not willing to concede that any piece of boardwalk, even if it runs along a piece of private property right now, we're not willing to concede that it's not necessarily something that the public should be able to continue to access or that it's completely privately owned. We're actually evaluating some some of the prior like permitting and want to pull together some more records as it relates to like Register of Deed records and some of the prior council approvals and reviews. Just want to throw that out there that that boardwalk's important to this community and we're not willing to necessarily, concede that it's automatically private just because it is in front of a piece of private property right now. It may in fact have some history that we're not all aware of that still would guarantee that public access going forward.
Madam Mayor, one last thing. And my understanding too is that the whole issue of taking, there's been some cases on that where there's a defense for the city to be able to do that, not actually considered a complete taking. So maybe that's something we need to look at too.
Anything else? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Mayor. What is the risk of not passing this on Monday if this is still under consideration and thought? There's a lot to think, we've been thinking through here. What's the risk if we don't do anything on Monday?
probably, obviously, with regards to PUD applications and things like that, there's a public process, and so if we got an application tomorrow, it would have to be publicly noticed, and it would go in front of the planning commission, 6 weeks from now. So I would doubt anything would come before the governing body before then. Personally, I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
But we should have it in place before those come.
If that's what you decide, yes, if that's how you guys feel, that, you would like to eliminate first floor apartments and, try and ensure a public benefit of the boardwalk, yes.
To add to Luke's point, I mean, if the city did get some kind of PUD application tomorrow that was proposing a development that the city felt was totally incompatible for the waterfront, we could adopt a moratorium and pause any consideration of that application and wait until our regulations get fixed up and then go ahead, which that process might sound a little bit familiar to some of you. So that's still a tool we have. And because of how long, something like PUD review takes, it's not like someone can just sneak in the middle of the night and start building something under the current regulations.
Are there concerns about not having it on the agenda on Monday?
And I assume this might be a dumb question, but I assume Jake, our attorneys have looked at this and we feel like if we pass this, we shouldn't have major issues with people who own those properties. This is something that we're allowed to do and that we won't see, some legal battle because of this.
Yeah, I would never come in front of you and guarantee you that there's never going to be a legal battle about something, because no matter how much time and effort we spend into making something defensible, there's always someone out there who might decide they have a problem with it, no matter how good it looks. But I can say a lot of thought and research went into crafting the regulations the way they are now, and that they're pretty defensible.
I assumed so, Jake, but thank you. I appreciate that.
course.
That's it.
That's the only question I would have, just listening to Jake, is if there is gonna be some language change before Monday's meeting, that we have it just redline it or something, so we know we can look at the language and make sure we're comfortable before it comes up for a vote, would be my only ask. And I don't know if he can do that between now and Monday, but
And so we are envisioning changes from what we're looking at now.
I just heard there was one small recommendation that Jacob made, which was to clarify. Maybe you could say that better than I can, to clarify that, the whole first floor.
Yeah, so I was envisioning, and I was actually just talking to Trent about this before the meeting. But I was envisioning just adding a couple of words to the last sentence of section E1. It reads, in no case shall departures from the maximum building height requirement and maximum number of stories requirement be authorized. I would just add something there to note that in no case shall first floor dwellings be authorized as departures with this PUD process.
Just to clarify that it doesn't come, yeah.
Okay.
And that was at the tail end of E1, right?
Mhm. Okay.
So if the council's comfortable with that, yeah, sure Jake and Trent can get me that and loop that update tomorrow, and we'll have that version in your packet for Monday to consider.
Okay.
And again, Monday if it gets here and you're like, yeah, we still need more time, it's okay. I mean, you don't have to vote on it Monday if you.
I mean, I've been buried in this for a few meetings, so I'm comfortable with it going forward on Monday. I don't know about the other council members, but just thought I'd throw that out there. And
I'm comfortable with it, but I want to be sure we. Okay, well, I don't hear any pushback, so we'll plan to see this on Monday.
All right.
All
Good.
right. That takes us to 6B, the contract between MDOT and the city of Saugatuck, which is on page 8.
Yeah, so I think all of you are aware that we received a $250,000 grant from MDOT towards the Maple Street project, which includes road replacement and water main replacement over much of that stretch. Potentially some addition of sidewalks, some stormwater improvements, all those sorts of things. So as you may recall, you approved Fleece and Vanderbrink kind of moving forward with some further planning and options evaluations. So that work's been underway for some time, and actually on January 22nd, we're going to talk with you as a council about those options. We recently met with the township and talked with them about some cost sharing on portions of the project. So I think we're ready for a full update to you as the council, and discussing costs. Not a cheap project, very costly for all involved. And so this $250,000 goes a long way and helps. So way the process works, they award you the grant, and we had to meet with them and discuss some process items on this grant, and then they've prepared the actual grant contract. So this resolution would essentially approve entering into the contract with MDOT to receive the grant dollars.
Russ?
Yeah, thank you. So just to make sure I understand the contract itself, it says that the state's grant funds may only be used for the Part A under state participation. Is that correct? That the 250 can only be used for that specific, those specific,
What part are you looking at here? Let's see.
on page 11. Part A state
Yeah,
participation.
so like on like the road and that sort of, yeah. So the road portion itself will well exceed that. Yeah, so we won't have any
Okay.
issue fully qualifying for the $250,000 portion and meeting our match portion of that, so.
Okay.
Yep.
The other question is, I believe I recall we had a figure of 2.6 million, maybe
Mhm.
a little less than that originally. And we're probably well north of that by now, I would assume.
It will be, yeah, yep.
So we're probably, well, anyway, I don't want to put you any commitment here. Are we talking a range of 3 to 5? Are we talking?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely in the 3 to 5 range depending on, you know, what we're looking at as far as sidewalks and things like that, and how extensive, you know, stormwater improvements, you know, yep, so.
Okay.
So, but definitely in that range for the water main and road and, yeah. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Real quick while we're talking, a sidewalk, I know we've been talking about that. That was part of the plan. I know a lot of residents there
Mhm.
would like to see that. Is that still a possibility with our funding or?
That's exactly what we're gonna talk about, I think, on January 22nd. I mean, we're gonna come up, we're gonna show you all the options and the cost of those options. I mean, frankly, I mean, you're looking at, you know, over $1 million for either sidewalk,
Right.
whether it's concrete or asphalt. You're looking at $1 million to do some sort of pathway along that stretch. So we're gonna have that option presented to you, in addition to showing you what the other portions of the project are going to cost, and then kind of show what we have available as far as funds in our street funds and what we have available in our water fund. Obviously, we have general fund dollars, and then we'll talk about what the township is so far willing to contribute towards at least the water main replacement and the portion of the road that the water main's under. So, yep. So we'll get into details with all that, and we're gonna send out some information to the folks that attended the open house, let them know that we're gonna have this on your 22nd agenda so that they can be fully informed while you have this
Are
discussion.
you planning that in the spring?
Nope, January 22nd.
Oh, good.
Jamie?
24.
24th, strategic planning,
Nope. This will be on the workshop agenda on January 22nd.
January 22nd.
Yep.
So you will have had that event before our strategic planning meeting then,
Correct. Yep.
which is good.
Yep.
So we'll have a little bit of information about that before going into strategic.
That
Good.
is true. That'll be top of mind as you go into.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, see the costs and all the options on that, be like, well, that's our project for the year, right? You know, so.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll move to the Water Resources Division grant application on page 24.
So going from the east side of the city to the west side of the city, there's, you know, and then talking about pathways is, I think all of you have heard from your constituents, there's, you know, been a lot of requests to have, you know, some sort of, you know, more pedestrian friendly options on the west side of the river. And the city has previously studied some options and it, you know, I don't know how many years ago it was now, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was kind of 3 different options that police had come up with at a very high level and kind of gave some high level costs. So last year during your goal setting, you set looking at, you know, Park Street and studying, kind of taking that next step to look at, you know, some further planning and conceptual designs and really looking at what is actually feasible is kind of the next step. Parks and Public Works Committee, you know, has been talking about it and also recommended the same to you. And so you were in alignment on that. So we got a proposal from Police and Vandenbrink to take that next step. You budgeted dollars towards that. And since then, I've been working to see, you know, how can we try to pay for at least some of that next step. And so grant opportunities come up with the Michigan Coastal Management Program through the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. I submitted a project interest form to them. I don't know if it was late summer, early fall, but I was recently able to meet with their staff and kind of evaluate the project before we just put all this time into applying for a grant. They were encouraged by the project, felt it would be very competitive for their grant dollars, hit a lot of their boxes, and especially with this being a phased approach, they loved the amount of public engagement that was being proposed through this. In fact, the staff member that I met with, she's very familiar with Park Street, as she's been out to Oval Beach and experienced folks walking all over, and and we talked about vegetation and stormwater and just all the challenges in that area. So so we've been working on kind of putting a grant application together, but we need the council's ultimate sign off to submit that and indicate that we have the funds to at least match whatever Eagle's willing to, or if Eagle's willing to put in half of it. So we plan on asking for $40,000, which would reduce at least the city's portion down to $20,000 from paying for the full amount now.
Yeah, thank you. I support this. The question I would have, and probably John Moxley can answer it, is those proposals that were presented several years ago, I'm assuming still have some value. And so they could contribute to the work here, so we don't have to start from ground zero, basically.
Yeah, so
Right.
you're spot on. So those, certainly the costs, that were presented in there
Sure,
are
yeah.
blown, but in fact, Eagle actually said they're pleased to hear that there's been some prior study, that this wasn't kind of the first time, and they want us to submit some of the prior work that's been done. And so, Fleets is planning on taking that prior work and those options, and then now kind of testing the feasibility of them and coming up with some actual concepts for you to see. A lot of it's probably going to be not just purely one option or another. It's probably going to be a combination of things is what they're looking at.
Yeah, so with that conversation, with the work that's going on.
Barry?
Yes, thank
Yep.
you. On Ferry Street, I know Douglas already has a path up to the top of the hill, the downhill to Ferry. We got some substantial work going on with the road repair down there, and then the next stretch that there is nothing going up to Campbell. Is there going to be a conversation with the city of Douglas to talk about how could we maybe collaborate? If we're going to get part of this done, it's like the road to nowhere, right? All of a sudden you got a path here. Why didn't you connect it back up here?
Mhm.
I think that's especially with the work going on down at the bottom of that hill. Now's a great time to say, hey, what could you realistically do in that process to maybe help continue what we have as a plan here? I think
Yep.
now's the time to bring that up.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And we did, the language that we drafted so far for the grant application talks about them being a partner and how that border there where, they're an important piece of this too. And I believe Douglas evaluated some pathway or sidewalk options as part of their culvert replacement and water main replacement. So I'll check with Lisa and kind of find out, what they've decided on that. Are they going forward with that? If not, I'll let them know that we're kind of planning on some further planning and see where that's at.
Yeah, I could definitely see being one of those things that if we didn't do that and that project was completed at the bottom of the ferry and people say, why in the world didn't you talk to
Yeah.
Douglas about?
Totally agree. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll check in with Lisa on that.
Thank you.
and At least let her know that we're wanting to take the next step in some planning in that area, and we're applying for some grant dollars, and hopefully maybe they're just planning on bringing it there, and they'll be set to go once we get our side ready to go. So.
What's our likelihood of getting this grant too? I know Saugatuck always doesn't score high enough because of our economic success and so forth. That just doesn't put us.
Yeah, I don't see, I don't understand that. My understanding is that this grant doesn't have particularly like economic factors necessarily within it. And that's what the benefit of they offered the kind of the pre-meeting to
Okay.
discuss feasibility. So no guarantee, but
Not a shutdown though.
But they
Not a
could
shutdown.
Wave us off if.
Yep. They said it hit a lot of the boxes for this program. And we talked frankly about if we're awarded this grant, I mean, this is the first phase, that engages Eagle. And if this is feasible and doable, that hopefully helps us have a case later for maybe a larger pot of money if we're actually getting to the construction phase. So.
Great.
Other questions? All right, moving on to D, the review of survey questions for strategic planning on page 34.
Yeah, so you probably recall from your last workshop session, you had some discussion about, kind of about what the next strategic planning meeting would look like. And we talked about, doing another resident survey. And so I think the consensus was to use the same questions that were previously asked, and those are on page 35 and 36. But then maybe to have some additional questions for residents to answer around those, kind of goal areas. And then there was also a suggestion to take, the priorities that we're working on, for this fiscal year. And ask residents, hey, how do you feel like we were progressing on, these priorities that we've set? So I took the priorities that were either listed as essential or desirable. So those are all listed. And then, kind of worked on some questions around the goal areas to kind of get us a sense of how do folks feel like we're doing in each of these areas beyond, providing feedback on which ones they think should be priorities. So open to your feedback on any additions or changes that you might want. The plan is for this we're hoping to send this out probably, we talked about Monday, and then we talked about having it open for a few weeks. And then that should give us enough time to get you the results ahead of time, so that way you have time to digest before your actual strategic planning meeting.
Questions, thoughts?
I only have one thought. I think it covers just about everything that anybody would want to look at. Is it possible that we could pay the paper and put this in the paper, the actual survey, so that people at least are aware that it's there and coming, and if they don't get the, email or something like that?
We can definitely take out or like put notice that we have the survey and have like paper copies available at City Hall, or are you asking for like the full survey to be printed in the paper?
Well, it's what, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. Well,
Yeah, that would be a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with these.
Okay.
This is a lot more comprehensive
Mhm.
than what we've had in the past.
very good.
My only question would be on page 39.
Mhm.
I just recall some of the items, particularly under Parks and Recreation, were more deferrable items that we decided, weren't a this year thing. They were desirable but deferrable. So like Coughlin Park restrooms, somebody's going to say, yeah, you didn't do that. But it's also like, hey, yes, we would like to do that. They're desirable, but we couldn't do it this year with our budget. I don't know. I'm just asking, like, some of these items might have been on our list of deferables.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's just a thought.
Similarly, I love the questions on page 37 and top of page 38. My sense is that on page 39, we're really getting into the weeds. And my guess is a lot of people, it's, supporting special events. It's like, I don't know. I just think a lot of people wouldn't have enough information and it's a bit overwhelming. So I would be comfortable losing the questions on page 39 page 39 and 40.
Agree.
Yeah, and for that reason, the way I felt, some of those items were,
Yeah.
lower on our list of priorities, so we did not address them. And, they're not in this budget year and maybe not next budget year, considering some of the costly projects we have coming up. I just don't want people to think, well, you said you were going to do that and you didn't.
Right.
So,
I do think it sets, yes, I agree. It sets an expectation that might not have been realistic. I mean, it was
Yeah.
part of a list. And then some of them are just like, increased collaboration with the CVB, like nobody's.
You've got a good point. And, a lot of people, even floating homes litigation, a lot of people are gonna be like, well, I don't really know where that's at.
Right.
Because we're always in closed session.
Yeah.
Most people don't know where we're at with that,
Right.
so how are they able to answer for fair, satisfactory,
so yeah, I would support losing page 39 and 40 from the survey as well.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, I think we're in the days of, especially considering yesterday that I'm gonna call it the Deer Survey came out, which, by the way, are there hard copies downstairs?
Yep.
Okay, I need to grab one for some people in my neighborhood that are not online. Great. I think we're starting to get to the point of survey saturation, not just from the city of Saugatuck, but just generally speaking. I think the less we ask and the more focused and strategic questions we ask, the better results we're going to find. And I'm really talking on the order of 5 questions, maybe. Not And I support getting rid of page 39, I think, and also I would say if we even include something like that, it'd be a numerical value, not words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, these days, people are so surveyed over everything. And so in order to get attention, I think a little bit of thought as well as simplification, I think is important. We really want to get value out of this. And I know that there was discussion last time about people really enjoying seeing the comments which were in the packet. I enjoyed reading those as much as everybody else, but it really just does become like a Facebook post in my opinion. It starts to look like a Facebook post. And I find that to be of limited value from an actual planning and strategic standpoint. It's a good way for people to kind of release a little bit of steam, I guess. But that's why we have public comment in meetings. And so I would say, I find a little value in that part of it, but I would say simplification and focus of the questions, I think would be critical in order for us to get really good information from it. That would be my goal.
I just found themes, when people were answering on their own, like seeing a lot of people talking about short-term rentals, that was like something from the survey, let alone when you go to door when you're campaigning. But in the survey, it just kind of, you got to see themes of what a lot of people had on their mind. And I felt it was valuable, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a way for things to bubble up.
Yeah.
I think, at least in my mind, what's important to you and how are we doing, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, you want to structure the questions, below aligning to that, but those are the two fundamental things I think we're trying to get out of the public at large. And to your point, Russ, which I think is a very good point, keeping it simple and giving them an opportunity to, embellish what they see as being their priorities and or at least what's important to them, where we should be taking our priorities for the next year would be really important. So to that degree, the extent we pose questions that imply that this is already a priority, I think it's not going to work out for us. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Clark. And I would, and I've had a couple email exchanges with the mayor on this. I really think the city does need to get serious about vision, mission, and values. When I see questions like this come across and 90% of this community doesn't listen to us, they don't watch our meetings, they're not into it like we are, we're the junkies. This is why we're elected to be here to do this work. 90% of the town. So when you ask them a question about how we did on a particular thing, without being able to tie that back to a strategic objective or a mission or a vision that we have for the city, is going to be difficult for someone. I mean, you can judge how you think they did, but until you tie that back to something that we as the policymaking body has said, this is what we think the community should be thinking about, who's leading the process? The council should be leading the process. And again, I think the city, and I said this at the last meeting, I really think we need to up our game on this. And I support the survey, I support simplifying it, but I think we have another step and level that we need to go to really kind of better this.
Okay, so in terms of the survey, it sounds like we're aligned on getting rid of the questions beginning on page 39. Are we okay with the questions on pages 30, that begin on page 37, that first chunk, to get more detail on how we did? Is that still, because that was a desire we talked about at the last meeting?
Yeah, but I would personally like to see these exactly how they're going to be surveyed in the packet for Monday, as well as I would see us changing over to numerical answer as opposed to poor, good, bad, whatever. I think numbers are far easier for people to understand than that's how many surveys are done these days anyway, numeric. That would be my suggestion.
Other thoughts to share? Ryan, questions from you or thoughts from you?
No, I defer to the council on what you would like. I remember these discussions in past years, and I think, again, those first 2 pages are, I think the past conversations were keep it very simple.
Yeah.
And I think there was a desire for some more, and I totally hear you. You've kind of looked at all the priorities like, yeah, okay, that's starting to be too much, but maybe those other areas. I think numerical sometimes tends to just skew average versus the words tend to, I think.
I have read that too, the rationale for using the words is that it kind of it requires a little bit more, I'm just gonna say, put it in the middle, but
I'm good with the words. I feel if I were to fill it out, I'd want to say poor, fair, satisfactory, or good or excellent.
I'm not going
I-
to stand in
I
the way
feel
if it's
good.
not changed. That's not going to be, I'm not going to die on that hill. I thought though, the questions, the goal area questions that we're talking about, those were ones that were sent out the last survey, right?
Right.
Word for word?
No,
No, we didn't.
no,
do
no, these
those.
are, what's on page 37 and 38 are new, so.
Brand new question.
That's what I came up with based on your conversation after your last
Okay.
meeting, so.
Yeah, these are all, yeah.
that's
Okay.
it.
All right.
The way we set it up was that we'll have the questions that were asked last time first and straight to the point. Folks can give their feedback. If folks want to drop off when they see the next list, they can, it'll still count their results and you'll still get it.
Mhm.
So it's not that they have to go all the way to the end to hit submit or for us to get their results. So we may have some drop off because it's starting to get a little long at that point, but at least you get your
Okay.
base core questions in, so.
And I know one of the criticisms that was brought up during the last survey is that I know people have to answer whether they're a resident or whether they're a business owner, whatever the case may be. Since we're managing this, it's not managed by an outside company. How do we ensure that Russ doesn't go in 5 times and answer 5 different ways or kind of stuff the ballot box?
Well,
Do we have a way to, within SurveyMonkey, can you
Yeah,
restrict it? So,
I just did the deer survey and that's set up like it should be. I can't take it again on my one device. But I could probably use my phone, another device, right, if I wanted to.
Jamie?
Yeah, when I go into SurveyMonkey, I do have the ability to look at everyone's address and see if there are duplicates.
I think we scrubbed those out last time, if I remember. I just want to make sure that this is as pure data as we can get it and we're
And-
not.
And then when the question on the deer survey, it said, are you a resident of Saugatuck City? Is there any way to prove that for people that take the?
Nope.
No, like I said, yeah, at the end of the day, like I said, yeah, it's not a scientific study. It's, we do have the ability to check IP addresses, but we also have to be careful because there could be multiple people in a home choosing, like, just, they live together and they
Right,
want
you've
to,
got an
so.
iPad, you've got your
Yep.
computer. you've
So
got-
if we see like an abnormal amount of, from one IP address, we can, flag those and look at how many results we have there. But I think, the survey at the end is, it's a tool for you, right? It's to give you one piece of information. I think you all have a really good sense on, where your constituents are at, have your ear to the ground and hear what folks are talking about, what they're interested in. And so I think this will be a test of, some of what you're hearing and take a look at.
Yeah, I'm just asking because we've had people even on our own committees that have admitted to taking surveys multiple times.
And we found those. That was for the short-term rental survey. And I think if there were 4 or more, they flagged those.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay, all right.
And just to clarify, I just wanted your feedback. Unless you want to vote on these questions, I think we're going to plan on putting it together and sending it out on Monday, unless you have a strong desire to actually vote on these. So, don't think it's needed or
Yeah.
anything.
I think that's.
Okay,
Chris?
all right.
Yeah, Mayor, one more thing, then could we at least have a letter go to the editor explaining this? That this is what's coming and why we need it and everything. So just to get the word out there. So look for this on your computer and that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure.
And will we have copies available at City Hall, like our last survey that you did?
Yeah, so any survey that goes out, I always have printed copies here.
Oh, okay.
And then, yes, deadline for the paper is 12 on Monday, so I'll get that out to the paper, but it'll be published next week. But the
So-
survey will go out a few days before the paper notice.
So like Judy, who owns the Singapore Bank building, who doesn't do anything electronically, if she wants to participate, I can just tell her, hey, come down to City Hall.
I have
pick up a
like
copy.
30 of them down there right
Okay,
now. I
good.
always print out paper copies, any
Okay.
survey we send out.
Thank you.
Nice.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, on to F, which is the staff wage scale inflation adjustments on page 69. Your city manager.
All right, so, earlier this year, the council reviewed a consultant recommendation for an updated wage scale for staff, and we talked at that time about the scale being adjusted at the end of each year for inflation, so that way the wages actually keep up with well, inflation, simple as that, right? Cost of living kind of adjustments. Took a look at kind of where inflation's fallen this year, and really inflation's tough right now. It's just kind of, the data is just bouncing around all over the place. I think it's kind of really in that, 2.4 to 2.7% range. And the Fed today just met and actually cut interest rates, but I think their newest like estimates are that inflation may be above 2% now for into 2027, which is a year beyond what they were initially anticipating. So they're still grappling with it and trying to get a hold of it. The Social Security Administration and the cost of living adjustment that they gave to Social Security recipients was 2.5%. In Michigan, as it relates to increasing taxable value on your property, Michigan has a formula to determine the consumer price index, and they use Bureau of Labor and Statistics information, and they look at several months of previous data. And so your tax bills next year, assuming that it didn't uncap and you've owned it for a while, you're actually looking at on the taxable value a 3.1% increase. So they're kind of bouncing around all over the place. Taking a look at some of our health insurance costs also went up this year. My recommendation is a 2.5% inflationary adjustment to the scale, and then a 0.5% kind of lump sum to kind of account for some of the variability that we've seen. I kind of provided those costs in here in your packet. We did budget for both merit and inflationary increases this year. If you wanted to go higher, I provided that data to you as well, but I look for your feedback.
Yeah,
Joe?
go ahead.
Question last year. Was there adjustment made last year? What was that?
So the adjustment in July of 2023 was simply, it was merit and inflation all tied together was 10%. And that was coming off a year of, I think Social Security had gone up 8%, and
I think labor in 23 went up 9%, I think.
yeah, around that. Yeah. Yep. So
it was in line with maybe even a little bit below the average earnings increase over the course of the year. Okay.
yeah. And just as a, 'cause I know we have some newer council members since our discussion in July. So we have two sets of, raises that we're looking at for staff. We have step increases, which are really merit-based. As you gain more experience and education and time with the city in your position, you're getting a merit increase. And then, the COLA increase kind of on top of that. So a combination of the two, say you got a step increase and you were to get this 2.5% increase, you'd be looking at 5.5% for this year. So.
Yeah.
Russ?
Yes, thank you. So on page 70,
Mhm.
the 3% and 2% increase, so that 11,901.15 for the remainder of the current fiscal year, that's a lump, that's in total, right? That's across all employees.
That's across all full-time employees and is fully loaded as payroll taxes, what we would pay into retirement on those additional wages. Yep.
Okay. The other question I have is around the general 2.5% inflation adjustment. That's not tied to merit. So
Correct.
there's, so that's basically, I forget what they call it. See, inflation, what do they call, there's a term for it. The government gives it to the Social Security folks every year too. Oh gosh.
But the
Anyway, sorry.
COLA, like cost of living
Yeah, COLA,
adjustment?
thank you.
Yep.
So where does merit come into the play here? So that's going to be above and beyond this. This is just going to be the COLA.
Yep. So the merit increases were this past July is when they got merit increases. So, assuming you're meeting performance expectations, you move on to that next step. So we would adjust the scale. They're going to get the inflation in the second, pay period essentially in January. And then in June, we'll do performance
Eligible
reviews.
for another.
Assuming they're meeting their expectations, they'll get and they're not maxed out. And that's the other piece of it. If you're not maxed out on the scale, then you would get a bump in July.
Yeah, and the scale, which is published on page 71 is, and of course, we don't know where the individuals are at this point, but that's where that comes into play, right?
Yep.
So it's a two-step, COLA in
Yep, I
January.
get it. I understand.
If I might just for clarification,
Mhm.
so it's really a 3% cost of living adjustment, a 0.5% being a one-time adjustment in a lump sum form, correct?
Correct. Yep. It's just not tied in long-term. Yep.
And I'm sorry if I didn't hear that. Why is that a lump statement? lump payment?
Yeah, so I was back and forth between, 2.5 straight up or 3% straight up. Again, I think the inflationary numbers are really just bouncing around all over the place depending on the data
Right.
that you look at. And so I think to account for some of that variability, and also taking into account that our health insurance costs have gone up, that's fully absorbed by the city, and that's a long-term cost that we're gonna have, that I felt the one-time 0.5% lump sum, you know, was, an appropriate way to go, and then to lock in that 2.5% inflationary adjustment.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll see a year from now where we're at with inflation, and maybe it normalizes higher, or maybe it continues to settle back down. But I think the 0.5% covers some of that variability that we're seeing.
Okay.
Um,
And just more of a personal comment, this is generous. My company does not give a COLA. Everything is merit-based. So.
That's
yeah,
fair.
This is a nice perk for our employees. Not everybody does this, so.
It's true.
I'll add too, that the 0.5% is actually beneficial to the city because you're not
Lucky.
building, it's a recurring salary base adjustment. And I'm sorry, Councilman Gardner, I'll cover this night. Space out, but the total cost increase, that's fully loaded, correct?
Fully loaded, including payroll taxes, including how much extra we would have to put towards their retirements. Yep. There's one other, just, for your knowledge, there's an employment cost index that the Bureau of Labor and Statistics also has. And so, took a look at that as well to kind of see where government employees were falling. And, at least on the public administration side, it was at like 5.1%. So now that's inflation and merit, so combined. So I think we're still actually probably even a little bit above that. So, but.
Okay, any other questions, thoughts? Okay, move on to F, which is the council review and approval of the city manager performance evaluation criteria, which is on page 72.
All right. Maybe the mayor and I will tag team this, but obviously I included in the packet my employment agreement language. It speaks to the council in consultation with me as the employee, kind of setting what that evaluation criteria will be. I took a look at Kirk's criteria and Ryan Heiss's criteria as the two previous managers. There was very little difference between the two. I think there was one question on one and maybe two, a couple of questions that weren't on the other. So I essentially combined the criteria from both, and look forward to some discussion with the council on the criteria.
I'd be happy to start. When I first saw this, I was a little mad, to be honest with you. I've had several questions that I brought up with the current leadership as well as previous leadership, that the process itself is not bad, but what we don't do is we don't work with the managers at goals and performance objectives. These are exactly the same performance criteria that were used for the previous manager. These have remained unchanged, other than you mentioned a couple maybe have been used or not used. And then I became disappointed. And I'm disappointed because I just don't think the council is doing a really good job helping the manager focus on the things that we think are important, tied back to our strategic goals, et cetera, as to what performance looks like. I'll use one example here. Customer service responds in a timely, courteous, and effective manner to calls for service received from City of Saugatuck residents. I have no way to measure that. How do I measure that? And this is not against Ryan Cummins. How do I actually measure his performance on that? I'm hearing fewer complaints from citizens with Ryan than I heard regarding the previous manager, but that's not even, that's apples and oranges. So I have a difficult time answering these questions. And I went back and I looked at my answers to the two previous reviews I did for the previous city manager. And I struggled then too, because I had absolutely no way to objectively measure or understand how I was to rate the performance. And I've got that problem with this one as well. And again, it's not a reflection of Ryan's personal performance, but some of these I can't, like the first, I simply can't answer that. I have nothing to measure on.
I agree. When it comes to supervision leadership, then I have to talk to individual employees and ask them, Same thing with, interpersonal relations and, things like that. That I would have to take the time to talk to all the employees and ask them, hey, how's Ryan doing? How's his leadership? And, those kinds of things. So I found that last time we did this too with Ryan Heiss, is that a lot of the questions, I thought, well, it's hard for me to know exactly, how they're doing, because you're asking me questions about his relationships with other people, other employees, unless I take the time to sit down with every employee, I thought about this too. Is there a way that we could sit down with, employee heads in a closed session? Where we sit down with Scott and our clerk and, whoever. I mean, how else would we know, what those answers would be?
And I think this gets back to and I've asked this question repeatedly, to have a meeting with the manager and the council. I asked from the day that we hired Ryan Cummins to begin to have a conversation together about goals and objectives. That has never happened.
So I'm gonna jump in here. In his contract, his
Mhm.
goals are the city's priorities. So what we set, at last year's strategic planning, those are his goals.
And
so-
those should be the questions, not these.
So, I mean, we can certainly look at that. And I think, I can't remember the last time you kind of gave us an update on, I think it seems like about once a quarter, you kind of report back to us about, where we are.
Yeah, and certainly at your strategic planning meeting in January, we're gonna tell you how we're doing with the goals for this fiscal year. I think from my perspective, number 9 on, again, this is the criteria that the council has used for 2 previous managers, but number 9 talks about city goals and accomplishments. I mean, that's the area to kind of evaluate how am I doing and taking into account these other areas, how well I'm doing and carrying out the priorities that you've set for the year. And my employment agreement language talks about, it speaks to exactly the process that we have in place, where you kind of sit and meet and discuss priorities and set priorities for the fiscal year. And then the employment agreement talks about how obviously they should be attainable within certain time limitations, and also depending on the budget that you give me to do it at the end of the day too. But
And again, I want to make sure that this is clear. I am not criticizing the manager's performance. This
Oh,
is the
no,
process.
Yeah.
This is the process. And to your point about number 9, we should have had a conversation back when we hired Ryan Cummins as to what are the city goals and what are going to be the measurements that are going to be against that for him to be able to report back to us. This is how my process works in my job. What did you have as your goals? How did you do on them? And I have to do my own review, and then that's reviewed by my manager. My process also includes selecting, I think, up to 5 different people that I work with to give feedback on my performance with them. And I can either choose to see that, or if they choose not to share that with me, that's their choice. That's a feedback process that's very common in the workplace these days. And to Mr. Munson's point, again, without going around and talking with individual people, I would have no sense of how to measure some of that.
Well, one thing we do have, the goal. I mean, he's reported to us on progress against the goals. So, I mean, the goals preceded him. His goals preceded him because they were our goals for the city. So I would argue the goals have been there. I think we can, one way is for him to kind of recap again. We can take a look at that. But hold on. I do think, though, some of these other questions are worthwhile. I think there's one on proactivity, which I think we get insight into. I think we get insight into his planning and problem-solving skills. I think, we don't see all of his interactions with others, but I think we can all speak to interpersonal relationships, his organizational and communication skills. So really, customer service, I think that's kind of a, squishy one. I would be happy to lose that. But I think some of these others, we do financial management. Quality of his work. I think these are all, just because we've used them in the past, I think they are relative to our work with him. I don't have any, I think those are all important. I mean, we want somebody who does quality work, who's proactive, who's a good financial manager, I do agree, it's a little harder for us on the customer service, and actually he's his job is sort of less customer service on a day-to-day level, but certainly his so I think his interpersonal skills might suffice there, but
And I think we would know, you know, if he had poor customer service, I'm sure we would hear about it from our constituents. And as far as supervision and leadership, I feel like we would hear from people,
Yeah.
as we have in the past.
I feel when we last did this, some of us did hear from people about some of these things.
Right.
However, I feel that we kind of dropped the ball a little bit the last time.
yeah, but, you know, we're here today to talk about.
Right, but
yeah,
that's why,
which-
I'm just saying, I think
Yeah.
that's why we're being a little bit more.
Got it, yep, Chris?
I would like to see this set right here, that something that we do in closed session. I think that we'd be a little more open to discussions, as Gregory has had people come to him. I've had people come to me. And it's very hard for me to sit here and look at Ryan and say, oh God, your customer service sucks. You know, I think we have to, and I wouldn't say that. I mean, that was just hypothetical. But I think we've all heard different things that I would like brought out would fit more individually into these.
So this
types.
discussion is on the form itself, not on, so I think the process is another question.
I don't have a problem with the form then.
Part of the process, isn't it?
Yes, but then within closed session, we can have those discussions.
Right, so,
Yeah, and I would ask for, that feedback. Trust me, I want your feedback. I want to know what I'm doing well, and I want to know what, you think constructive criticism on what I can improve, and that feedback's valuable to me. But I agree, I think a closed session would be appropriate when it comes time to actually do the evaluation. Correct.
Yeah, and this is a great conversation, and I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't find all of these to not be of use. Some of them, I frankly will have to say, I can't answer this question. I don't have data to be able to answer this question, or I have no experience to answer the question. I think this presents an opportunity, though, as I suggested earlier this year, is get through the process, fulfill our obligation to the contract with the city manager, and then appoint maybe three select people from the council to spend 90 days or something like that, and work with the manager to come up with a different process with measurable goals. Will be after our strategic planning session in January. Set some very measurable, specific goals that he can then report to us on a quarterly basis or regular basis. And then at the end of the year, we can say, yeah, met the goal, or no, didn't meet the goal. There's kind of like what we're doing the survey, right? Did poor, whatever. That's where I think we need to go with this. And I think out of fairness to the manager's position, that's where we need to go, because I just don't think we do a really good job helping him really kind of focus on the things that we would like to see improvements on, or actually get reports on.
well, I don't agree. I think we do have his goals. I mean, and so that's what we need. I don't think we need a new process to look at how he's doing at reaching the goals and priorities we set out for him, and that he then manages the staff to. So, and, he and I and the mayor pro tem meet regularly. If there are issues, we definitely want to hear that and can figure out ways to address it. But in terms of monitoring progress against goals, that's what our meeting, I mean, that's the work we're doing. So I don't think we need to create a new process. I mean, we can say, let's, once a quarter, take a look at where we are on goals, but I think I feel like I've heard that. So,
I will just, thank you very much. I will finish by saying this seems like an old process that doesn't work very well for me as a council member and as elected official. And I think it's a disservice to our manager, and I think we could do better.
Joe?
I can only tell you what I've seen work well in the past, and and I do agree with Councilman Gardner on having measurable goals, right? And typically what I'm used to seeing that works very well is you have organizational goals, right, which I think would captured here to some degree. And then you link, everybody gets linked to those goals, right? So this is what we're trying to do. Okay, so here are the three things you do to contribute, and here's how we measure them. But then you need a section, which again, I think this covers very well, both some organizations call them management business objectives, right? Which are more subjective things that say, okay, we want you to improve your people skills. for this and for that. Here's what we want you to do next year, blah, blah, blah. I don't think we're that far away.
Mhm.
Right.
I think getting to the measurable part's always the hardest part, but always has the biggest payback. So we can pick for whatever next year and say, after we do our planning, this is what's important to us. This is how it translates into your job. It's gonna help him, it's gonna help us. I don't think it's a big deal to do that. I think
Yeah,
it's
well,
easy.
And yeah, and what we decide on, like, that is his job. So I think, and we can say in the strategic planning session, how are we gonna measure? I mean, what does success look
I think
like?
it's as simple as that. And then, maybe you don't need all of these. Maybe you just need 3 of the business objectives that say, work on this, this, and this is gonna help round you and make you a more effective person and serve the city better. I mean, that's just how I look at it.
Yeah, I would also ask the person we should also be asking the manager what his goals and objectives are. What does he think he'd like to do? And to your point about the MBOs,
Uh-huh,
what are the things he'd like to accomplish? What are areas that he sees for improvement?
good point.
And
So in
that
the
should
pa-
be one of the, and that, excuse me, that should be one of the measurable, he should be, that's a collaborative conversation.
Right.
That's,
He
that's
might
what
bring
I've been
something to
suggesting.
light that,
Right.
that is really important, vice versa.
So in the past with other city managers, over the last several years, they all do a self-evaluation. And I assume, Ryan, you'll still continue to do a self-evaluation.
No, I would welcome that opportunity. Yeah, once we're,
And I know he's aligned with our goals. It's just that, like you said, how to follow those goals and make sure that they're being met by, these certain tasks are being done. These tasks have been done by this time. That's how we can measure those goals. I know that he aligns, he's with us during strategic, he's with us at every meeting. But as far as his task to get to those points, I don't know exactly his day-to-day, tasks that are driving us further, to those points. We do, of course, have our, manager's report, but, I have to agree with Joe and with, Russ, just something a little bit more measurable. So okay, we got through this, we got through that, that kind of thing.
So it sounds like, let me try to summarize that for most of the questions on the form we're looking at here are fine and just in terms of feedback on, criteria that we will, as we, looking forward for the goals we set in January, we'll pay attention to how we'll measure progress against those. And in terms of, the city manager's evaluation, we'll have, we'll look at the past goals. We didn't define metrics last year, but I think we can tell how well he has succeeded in his job with those. We'll get more specific as we can for the next fiscal year. We'll ask Ryan to do a self-eval. We'll do this. And then it sounds like the desire is to have that meeting in closed session.
The only other question I would ask is, and I don't recall, is there a policy behind this? Or is it just the section from your contract that dictates what we need to do? Is there a city policy?
Contract.
It's his contract.
We need a city policy to define all these things that we're talking about. I don't think there's any discussion on that. We need to have a policy that explains this for us and as well as future
Question for
council.
Jake.
Well,
I don't think that's a question for the attorney. That's a decision that the city can make independent. It doesn't need a legal. thing.
but we do have to honor the terms of his contract and
It would not violate this contract, from my perspective. It would fulfill actually what we're trying to do.
So what does that look like, Russ?
Be a human resources policy that dictates what a performance evaluation process looks like for the manager, as well as it would flow down to all the employees of the city. And I think we have.
So
one
our
for-
human resource attorney usually,
No, we don't need an attorney for this.
well, I mean,
This
that's
is
who
a-
our human resource person is our human resource attorney. That's all I'm
Or we-
saying.
We've got enough experience here to draft something that we could consider,
Mhm.
maybe have an attorney look at if needed.
Well, you
but
have
that-
to have an attorney look at. You can't just draft something and not have our
I think we
attorneys
can-
look at it, but
I think we're overcomplicating this.
Oh.
I think it's pretty easy to put
you
something
might be
together.
overcomplicating it for sure.
okay,
I'll finish. Think though that I see this as something that we're doing to improve city operations and has no reflection on, right, this discussion is not a reflection on performance, which I'm gonna
Right.
second, but Councilman Gardner said, so. I mean, I don't want that to come across that
Right.
at all.
By no means.
We're just trying to make things better and more measurable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it
No, I
sounds
think
like with,
we're all in agreement on that.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
sounds like within strategic planning, we can start coming up with those goals and have that ready to have measurables
Yeah. and we
for our
can
city manager.
take a look at what is documented in terms of I haven't read the employee handbook for a while, so. All right, anything else?
I think we owe it to ourselves to really take the time with it this time.
Absolutely,
Considering the past.
absolutely. Okay, that takes us to the second public comment period. No one in the room, so anyone online want to make a comment, you can comment about anything you wish. Steve?
Hey, good evening. Hey, first I wanted to kind of apologize for earlier. Was out of town, got back late last night, and had errands up in Holland, literally just walked to the door when this meeting started. So I wanted to be there in person. So that when we were talking about the waterfront preservation, I just want to remind everyone, as you're looking at that and thinking about it for Monday, as I think Joe said, it did come before us like 3 months ago in planning. We looked at numerous different alternatives. And I believe that we've kind of covered all the bases and still leave some flexibility. If you want to add in that, the PUDs cannot look at first floor apartments as was suggested, I think, that is fine. I think to the Councilwoman Stanton's point, I was somewhat, we went back and forth as a planning commission because by putting that in, you do lose some of the ability that if you had some great development that was really going to offer the city a lot, that you wouldn't have the flexibility to kind of at least have the planning commission as well as council review that through the PUD process. So so putting it in there just makes it very clear. But of course, one of the things that I also realize is that if we had some great development that came forward down the road and we wanted to consider it, it still doesn't mean that it couldn't be amended at that time by going through planning, a public hearing, and then council. So I think that as you're looking at it, it's good with the way it is, and that's why we had a unanimous vote from the planning commission in favor of recommending it to council. If you want to add in that language that you can not have a PUD variance for height and first floor apartments, that's workable too. The one thing also to kind of keep in mind is there was some conversation about the south versus the north of Francis Street. Remembering that when the PUD was, or not PUD, when the waterfront preservation was put in place, Water Street North, which was what was previously north of Francis Street, used to have 100% lot coverage. So we already made a lot of restrictions and changes when we put the waterfront preservation in by requiring setbacks and line of sight to the water. So there's some things just to kind of look at and consider as you're debating whether to move forward. I'd like to see it move forward before we would have something potentially come before the planning commission, because as you always remember, if it comes before us and it meets all the requirements that are in place at that time, it must be approved. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. And then on the survey, by the way, I agree. If you guys could take out pages 38, 9, and 40, I think it gets too long as somebody who's done a lot of surveys. And I think, like Russ was saying, there's a lot of them out there. The longer they are, the less likely that somebody will complete it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Anyone else online wish to make a comment? All right. No correspondence, council comments. Chris, you want to start us?
Yes, great conversation. I'm very pleased with the waterfront preservation changes, and I'd say Merry Christmas. We still got another meeting, don't we?
All right, we do, but
Merry Christmas.
all right. Ross?
No comment, just good conversation today. Appreciate the feedback
Great.
and collaboration.
Lauren?
I don't have anything tonight.
I'm just going to flag, I was scrolling through the Washington Post last night and they had an article on 12 top travel destinations for 2024.
Here
We
we
were
are.
in it. It was the article they wrote about the dunes and Saugatuck and Douglas. So that was pretty cool. That's it.
Oh, I don't want to say too much because I got to go put on my makeup. I'll be Marley. We've got dress rehearsal tonight and just want to remind everybody that Christmas Carol is our last weekend. Our afternoon matinee for Saturday is sold out, but we do have a few tickets left for Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday at 7 p.m. You can go to SaugatuckChristmasCarol.ludus.com, get your tickets. We raised our ticket price a little bit this year. And we were wondering, how that would affect everything. We've actually sold more tickets at a quicker amount of time than ever. We believe we'll be donating up to $20,000
Oh,
from our
wow.
little production to Christian Neighbors.
That's true.
And I think everybody knows the great work that Christian Neighbors does here in our community, from feeding and clothing those folks in need. So it's the most we've ever given. We usually give around $10,000 a year. So we're happy to announce about a $20,000 donation will be made to Christian
That's great.
Neighbors.
That's
Yep.
really great.
Joe?
Great discussion.
Great. All right. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Opposed?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.